So today we're going to do a quick overview of which are my steps when processing a file. For that, we're going to see this cityscape from Seattle, from the super famous Cary Park. So this will do. All right, so these I've selected from my film strip down here, which is the image I want to work on. So the first thing that I like to do is balancing the light. So this is obviously pretty dark, so we want to bring some of this exposure up. So try to follow, so that this doesn't become a 2-hour video, try to follow where my pointer is. Right now it's going to be on the right side on the adjustment palette. So that's that. We want to make our highlights to really pop. So anything in this parametric curve, anything between 50 and 100, that depends on the file. So that probably around there. Then we go down, sharpening. These are my default values, 50 on the amount. If you've seen my sharpening quick tutorial that I did before, you've probably seen this, and if not, it's just pretty much so 51, 50, and 50. So 51, whatever, it doesn't really matter. For noise reduction, let's see how this is looking. So this could probably use some, let's go here, nothing too crazy. There's not a lot of noise here. A little bit on the color noise reduction. This is particularly going to affect the dark areas. So for example here, you don't really see it that much, so we don't really care then. The next thing, we want to make sure that we enable the profile on the lens and remove the color, the chromatic aberration, which we already noticed when we were looking up here. Right now, don't pay attention, this is blown out. I'm gonna fix it. But we were having some chromatic aberration there. So those are my initial adjustments. Perhaps get rid of some of these little sensor dust spots. That's the one I can see right now. So then we want to balance the sky. Because we increase the exposure, then the sky is going way too bright. So we're going to use the neutral density filter here in Lightroom. And when you use this filter, what it affects from the top to halfway down, so there's less impact here at the bottom of the file. And by the way, so this is where your creativity is going to come into play. So this is basically where you want to take your file. Do you want to make it a darker file? Do you want to keep it brighter? So that's an individual choice. That's too much. So let's do -1. And I have some polarizing issue around here. And I don't think there's much I can do about that in this area here in Lightroom. So let's keep playing around with this. So opening it up a little bit more. And obviously my main guy here, my main subject would be the city with the Space Needle in the foreground. So once that I have that, now it's time to bring it over to Photoshop. So here is the file in Photoshop. Now everything I do with my editing, I do it via luminosity masks, and for that I already have a action created, and so I'm not going to spend the time here explaining how to create the masks, because again this would become a 2-hour video. So I just apply my action and I create all the series of masks that I'm going to be using for developing the file. Okay, so that's done. So one thing that we haven't dealt with was here with the this blown out moon here. And so what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to duplicate this, and I want to open it in Camera Raw, and I am basically going to get rid of the neutral density filter. And let's go in and see what this looks like. Okay, so we can get rid of some of that, rescue some of the detail in the highlights there on the moon. I'm not terribly concerned, so I guess this is looking better. So this is going to process, going to take a little bit, and then what I'm going to do is just apply a mask filled with black on that layer, so basically none of these adjustments are showing through, and then I'm just going to reveal the adjustment made for the moon here. So as you can see now, this is one layer. This is the layer that we worked on in Lightroom. But so we're going to apply a mask filled with black. So that pretty much hides all the adjustments. Remember, when you apply a mask filled with black, it hides all the adjustments. If the mask is filled with white, then it shows all the adjustments. Because we're just going to apply it here, we're going to focus on that area right now. And so we're going to go and look at our masks. For those of you who have never seen a luminosity mask look like, so it's basically a series of progressively restrictive adjustments of the luminosity values of your file. So there's for the lighter tones in your file, and there's also for the darker tones in your file. So basically it would be an inverse. And then there's the mids, which is, these are a little more complicated to explain, but it's you subtract the highest, the brightest, and the darkest tones. And so you start getting, basically you're just targeting the midtones. But for now, we're just going to focus on the lights. Since we just want to focus on the moon, so if you think about this mask the same way you think about this black mask, so everything that's black, it's not going to show whatever adjustments we made, but everything that's white, it will show. So we need to look at something that is going to be restrictive in around the moon. So for example, this, so that it's white here and dark around it, so that the adjustments are just going to show here on the moon. So we're going to select this mask, and we have the marching ants around the moon. We're going to do Command H on a Mac, Control H on a PC, so that the marching ants are not visible. So the selection is still active, as you can see, but I'm just hiding the ants, the marching ants, so that they're not intruding on our adjustments. So now I'm going to paint on this mask with a white brush, and my opacity on the brush set to 30 up here, and I'm going to gradually begin to paint away. So as you can see, it's already bringing in some of the detail from the moon that we had before. If you look at the mask only, see, we've already revealed everything. Because of the mask, we were using these, the lights 3 or 4 for that matter, either one would have done. So whatever is around it, it's already pretty dark, so the adjustment doesn't show. So this is as far as we're going to get. But now the moon is not blown out. So we have our base to, let's call our base exposure done. So I like to keep everything organized inside groups. And so that way I can come back at a later time and clearly see what they are. The next step that I do is I work on the midtone contrast. Again, I already have a set of actions. And so this, the midtone contrast is created using 2 midtone masks. And so that's with and that's without. This adjustment, the midtone contrast, is always really strong in the sky, so I always mask it out. And when I mask the midtone contrast adjustment, So I put a mask on the group, which is basically affecting anything that it's inside the group. And so with a white brush, I'm sorry, with a black brush, and we're going to set, since we want to erase, pretty much hide all the mid-tone contrast in the sky. So we're going to set a pretty high opacity of 90, and then we're just going to paint black onto a white filled mask. So it's gonna, you will see how here this is already black. So let's get in here. So that's that. So that's before, that's after. So this is pretty subtle, and this is basically just targeting the buildings down here. But remember, the name of the game is subtle adjustments that are incremental and that are going to enhance your image gradually. The next adjustment that I do via another action is I target the saturation. And the saturation, again, this is creating adjustments via two masks, two luminosity masks. So once these are done loading, it's creating all the complex masks and applying, I'm doing a hue saturation adjustment layers. And you can see the different masks that this is applying down. And so let's group these together on a folder. We're going to call this saturation. And then we're going to apply the adjustment. So we have a recovery, we have a saturation increase. So I like to, let's try 30 here. So you can see this is, things are getting kind of pretty intense on the reds, but this is where the recovery comes in. So we're going to reduce the intensity here. So anywhere between 50 and 100 is our target, and so you can see on and off. So the adjustment at about so maybe we're going to leave this at around 90. Let's do that 85. And again, these are all of these adjustments. This is, don't paint by numbers. Don't follow what I'm doing here, because it's not what works for one image, it doesn't work for another. And this is something where you can just pretty much follow your intuition and see what where your creativity is going to take you. And then, so these are my basic adjustments. And from here, I start creating adjustment layers that are all based on levels adjustment layers. So let me delete this and show again what I did. So once I have these, so go adjustment layers, levels, and so here what I want to do is I'm going to target, so we're compressing some of our midtones here. And again, we invert the mask, and we're going to look at the, I'm going to be focusing on the buildings down at the bottom. So probably through the lights mask, to select the mask, to make this selection active. So it's Command or Control, and then click on the thumbnail icon. I click Command H to hide the marching ants, and remember the selection is still active. It's just hidden. And then I start painting with the paintbrush at around 30% because I like to paint in gradually. Start applying the adjustment. See, there's nothing happening here, and the reason why is because I have a black foreground color applying it on a black mask. So I need to inverse that. So now I have white color applying through a white mask. I'm sorry, a dark mask. And this is, like I said, this is very gradual. So this is, and I will show you the mask in just a sec. But I rather apply my adjustments gradually, little by little, at a low opacity rather than go crazy from the beginning and then have to go back. So here we are, and I will show you the buildings in just a sec. I will show you what the mask is doing, how it's applying. So as you can see, I'm pretty much revealing the mask. But remember always, so wherever in the image we have white, light gray, the adjustment is going to apply stronger. Where the image is darker or black, there is no adjustment showing. And I like to keep separate layers. So one, instead of doing a global adjustment for the sky, for the buildings, for the background, I rather do one adjustment for my land, for my buildings in this case, and then another one for the sky. So like you see, there's maybe you can barely see it. Let me get in closer, maybe you'll see better. So that's without, that's with. And so this is pretty much bringing out the highlights without affecting the shadows. And so what that means is we are keeping good contrast throughout our image. So we're going to repeat that, another levels adjustment layers. This time we're going to make our midtones darker. And we are going to, so this is really strong, right? So we're going to invert the mask, so fill it with white so nothing's showing. And again, we're going to keep working on the buildings right now. So we're going to, but this time since we are targeting the darks in our image, so let's see. So this seems to do the trick. You always, because this is too broad, so this would darken the image too much. This one might do, you may want to go and select a more restrictive mask than what you want to do so that it doesn't affect all the image, or you can apply the adjustments more gradually. So I think I'm going to go with the darks 3. Again, Command H to hide the ants, or Control H. Click on the mask. With my brush, I'm going to apply it at 40%. White as a foreground color. And so what this is going to do, this is going to target all the dark areas on the buildings, namely all the windows, all the structures, without affecting the highlights. So what this essentially does, we are making sure we have good contrast in our image so that it doesn't look washed out, so that it doesn't look, you know, flat. And again, these adjustments are not paint by numbers type of adjustments, because the way I decide to develop my images might be completely different from the way you decide to develop your images. I have a tendency, I like to process my things darker, with higher contrast. And so again, so that's without, that's with. Without, with. So that's a little too strong. So I'm going to, from the layer opacity, I'm going to reduce that to 70%. So it's there, but it's not overpowering. Maybe down to 60%. So once I have that, I'm pretty happy with my buildings here, with my so we're going to move on to adjusting the sky. Level adjustment layers. We're compressing the midtones here. Invert the mask, and then we're going to go look, are we using the lights mask, the lights to mask? I'm going to do the lights at a lower opacity, so I'm going to start at a 30% opacity. A brush, 30%, foreground color set to white. And we're going to make the adjustments here. And because I'm doing everything very gradually, you're not going to see dramatic changes. But you can see if you see it through the mask, you can see where how the adjustment begins to get stronger and stronger. And if I keep doing it, eventually it's not necessarily going to go completely white, revealing all the adjustment, but it definitely keeps getting lighter and lighter, meaning that the adjustment that we did shows stronger and stronger. And so there we are. So probably we're going to set this at around 50%. And then the next adjustment, so we deselect another adjustment layer. Then we're going to focus on the darker areas and the clouds. Invert the mask. Then we go look on our dark masks. So set on so darks we already see. These are, it would apply too strong throughout the whole thing. Maybe darks 2, darks 3. Let's try darks 2. And again, brush at around 30%, and let's see how that applies. As you can see, the tones in the image get richer, the colors get more saturated, and I'm not touching the saturation slider. I'm just adjusting the luminosity values applied through a luminosity mask. I'm starting to see something funny here in these areas. There's some purple something happening. And so I want to focus on these clouds because I want to really make them more dramatic and make them pop out. I work using a Wacom tablet. I find that if I'm just working on with the mouse, that's I don't have that much freedom. So the adjustment, what I'm doing here, I reverted the color to black because the adjustment got too strong here, and so I basically was accentuating the polarizer issue I had before. And so I want to pretty much hide the adjustment there. All right, so let's call it good for now. So I'm not liking this area here in the sky, but for now this will have to do. Otherwise, we would spend, sometimes these adjustments can take 20 minutes, sometimes they can take 2 hours. And we don't want to do that right now. So we have those. I'm not liking that sky. Let's see if we can fix it. So let's try to see if we can when you whiten you increase the highlights through a lights mask, it reduces contrast. So you have to be careful when you make those adjustments. But let's see what happens. Like I said, sometimes this requires more time than a quick tutorial video would show, which this is probably already going longer than I wish it to be. So let's call that good. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start focusing on sharpening. And so I'm going to stamp my layers. So to do that is Shift, Option, Command, or Control on PC and the letter E. What this is going to do is create a solid pixel layer of all my adjustments so far. So as you can see, nothing changes. It's basically the same. I'm going to go to Filter, Other, High Pass. And I'm going to select a radius of 1. For this particular adjustment, I like to do either vivid light or linear light. What this does is starts bringing in contrast and sharpness to the buildings here. So if you can see, hopefully you can see on the video, so all the windows, all the structures of the buildings look pretty nice and sharp. If I turn this mask off, now it goes soft. So on and off. The adjustment is not really applying too strongly on the sky. It's basically just for the foreground. And so the next step, what we're going to do, so we're going to repeat that. We're going to stamp all of our layers, Command Shift, Alt, and the letter E, or Control if you're on a PC instead of Command. So we have the same. So we're going to go back, Filter, Other, High Pass. But this time we're going to go really high. We're going to do, let's say 100. And this is going to look horrible in a second. You see, it's just a mess. Change the mode, the blending mode, to soft light. And so this would be way too strong for the buildings, but it gives a really nice definition and texture to the clouds. The way I'm going to apply this, so I'm going to mask out everything, this adjustment, and then with my brush set to about 50% opacity, I'm just going to paint in that adjustment just on the clouds. So this is bringing all the detail in the clouds. It's making it really present. You know, it's nice and sharp. Things have a good structure, good definition. So not so much up here in the top, but these for sure. Now, by doing this, I already found another dust spot on the sensor. So now we're going to group these two guys on a folder. We're going to call this sharpening. We're going to call these local adjustments. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the opacity on the sharpening. The foreground looks good, but the sky may not look, it's a little too strong, bringing in digital artifacts, which I don't want to have there. See, that's without and that's with. So I have two choices. I can either reduce the opacity of the sharpening layer, or I can apply a mask to the sharpening layer, to the sharpening group, excuse me. And so here I'm going to paint, I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to select a black, that's my foreground brush, and I'm going to do 40% opacity. And I'm pretty much just going to freehand the larger areas in the sky that don't have a lot of texture. And so we're reducing some of that digital noise. And I also just realized something. We have some nice red colors here in the background and the sky for the sunset. So let's try to bring those out. So I can go hue saturation and just increase saturation on the red channel, on the reds, which might be a good way to go. And some of the magentas as well. So this is extreme for you to see. So these are, again, these are very subtle adjustments that you might not see clearly on the over the video. So these are super subtle. Okay, so the next, and at this point we're doing final touches. We're going to add a layer, and we're going to fill it with a 50% gray. We are going to switch the blending mode to soft light with a black brush at 10% opacity. And I'm going to just go all around the edges, and I'll explain what I'm doing. So I'm pretty much adding a vignette. And the reason why I'm doing that at such a low opacity and just on the edges, so it's very subtle. You can barely see it, but it's there. So if you click, so that's with, that's without. So basically what that does, it helps me keep the eye inside the image. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to apply a new gray layer. I call these a Dutch burn layer, 50% opacity. But this time we're going to do blending mode overlay. We're going to paint with white at about 10% as well. Let's do 20%. And I'm going to rescue some of the highlights that may have gotten lost here on my buildings. And maybe, hopefully you can see it. So it's dodging my highlights while keeping contrast, and that's what the overlay opacity mode does. It keeps my highlights nice and bright without affecting my shadows and without affecting my contrast. Because I'm applying it through a mask, the adjustment is subtle. It's not like if I were to be painting just 10% white without a mask, this would not look good. This would look fake, and we don't want that. So I think we're getting done. We're getting close with final details, final adjustments. And finally, we're going to apply Orton effect. Get rid of some of the crunchiness of the sharpening and of the digital noise, and it's going to give the file a nice glow to it. So I don't know if you can see that. So that's with, that's without. But the final step is you want to get rid of all your masks. Otherwise your file size becomes huge. So again, I have an action for that. And so it's going to get rid of all of them. And at this point, all you need to do is save. So thank you for watching, and I hope this was useful to you.